A Spartan warrior named Aristodmus stands alone in his barrack at Sparta, summer of 480 BC. He's one of only two survivors of Thermopylae who made it back alive. The other survivor, Eurytus, couldn't live with the shame and went back to die with the 300. Aristodmus didn't. Now he walks through the streets of Sparta and nobody speaks to him. Nobody looks at him. He's breathing, his heart is beating, but in the eyes of every Spartan citizen, every warrior, every woman and child, he's already dead. They call him Aristodmus the coward. His own wife won't touch him. His children won't meet his eyes. This isn't exile. This is something worse. The Spartans invented a form of social death so brutal that it made men beg for actual combat just to escape it, and Aristodmus wasn't alone in his suffering. An entire city, an entire warrior culture, was living with a wound that wouldn't close. 300 of their best men, including their king, had been butchered in a mountain pass while buying time for Greece. The Persians had marched south, burned Athens to ash, and were still in Greece, occupying territory, taking slaves, and acting like they owned the place. The Greeks didn't negotiate. They didn't send diplomats. They sent 10,000 Spartans. Before diving into one of the most savage revenge campaigns in ancient history, if you enjoy learning about the brutal realities of ancient warfare and the forgotten stories of warriors who fought with nothing to lose, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. What happened at Plataea in 479 BC wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. It was a statement written in blood and screaming that echoed across the ancient world for centuries. Let's be very clear about something. The popular image of Thermopylae, the one you've seen in movies, is propaganda. It's beautiful propaganda, don't get me wrong, but it's incomplete. Yes, 300 Spartans held the pass. Yes, they died to the last man. Yes, King Leonidas became immortal. But here's what the movies don't tell you. After Thermopylae fell, the Persians didn't just win a battle. They won the entire war for about 8 months. They burned Athens. They occupied Boeotia. They controlled the Greek mainland. And every single day of that occupation, the Spartans sat in their city, watching, waiting, sharpening their spears and thinking about one thing: revenge, not the quick kind, not the emotional outburst kind, the methodical, industrial, cold-blooded kind. While the Persians were celebrating their victories and setting up occupation governments in Greek cities, something was happening in Sparta that nobody outside the city understood. The Spartan assembly made a decision that violated their most sacred religious laws. They decided to march their army out during the Carnia, a religious festival where all military activity was forbidden, the same festival that had delayed them from reaching Thermopylae in time to save the 300 in full force. This time, they didn't care about the gods. They didn't care about tradition. They were going to war, and nothing was going to stop them. The man who would lead them wasn't a king, not officially. His name was Pausanias, and he was the regent for Leonidas' young son. Pausanias was in his late 20s, young for commanding the entire Spartan army, but he had something the older generals didn't have. He had been at Thermopylae, not in the final stand, but in the early stages. He had seen the ground where his king died. He had walked past the place where the 300 made their last stand, and now he was going to take 10,000 Spartans, the largest force Sparta had ever fielded in its history, and he was going to find the Persian army, and he was going to destroy it. The army that assembled in summer 479 BC wasn't just Spartans. The total Greek force numbered somewhere around 100,000 men, with 38,700 hoplites, the heavy infantry that would do the real killing. But the core, the beating heart of this force, was Spartan. 10,000 Spartan hoplites, the largest deployment in their history, plus 35,000 Helots, the enslaved population who served as light infantry. The Spartans brought everyone, every able-bodied warrior, every man who could hold a spear and push in the phalanx formation, including Aristodmus the coward. Imagine being Aristodmus in that march north. You're surrounded by 10,000 men who despise you. You're carrying the same armor, the same shield, the same spear, but you're not the same. You're the walking reminder of survival without honor. And you know with absolute certainty that there's only one way to erase the shame. You have to die. Not just die, but die spectacularly. Die in a way that makes the poets remember your name for the right reasons. The Greek army marched north through the summer heat, heading toward Boeotia, toward the city of Plataea, where Persian scouts had reported that the Persian army was gathering. The Persian commander was a man named Mardonius, handpicked by King Xerxes himself to finish what Thermopylae had started. Mardonius wasn't just any general. He was Xerxes' brother-in-law, a veteran of multiple campaigns, and he commanded an army of roughly 120,000 men, including the best Persian cavalry in the world and the famous Immortals, the elite 10,000-strong unit that had broken the Greek lines at Thermopylae after the betrayal. Mardonius knew the Greeks were coming. His scouts had been tracking the Greek force for days, and he made a decision that would define everything that followed. He chose his ground carefully. He positioned his massive army on the north bank of the Asopus River, near the city of Plataea, with his back to friendly territory in Thebes. He had cavalry superiority, he had numbers, he had supply lines. On paper, he had everything. What he didn't have was an understanding of what happens when you take everything from men who have nothing left to lose. The two armies faced each other across the Asopus River for 8 days. 8 days of watching, waiting, skirmishing, psychological warfare. The Persians would send cavalry raids across the river to harass Greek supply lines. The Greeks would form up in battle formation, daring the Persians to cross and fight. Neither side wanted to attack uphill or cross the river under fire. Both commanders were waiting for the other to make a mistake. This is where we need to stop and correct a massive misconception about ancient warfare. It wasn't constant fighting. It was 90% waiting, 9% maneuvering, and 1% absolute nightmare violence. For 8 days, these men sat in the August heat, wearing bronze armor that could cook your skin if you weren't careful, rationing water, eating whatever supplies could get through the Persian cavalry raids, and thinking about what was coming. The Spartans weren't nervous. They were excited. Before diving into what happened next, I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. Please comment below to let me know where you're listening from, and if you're enjoying this deep dive into one of history's most brutal revenge campaigns, consider subscribing to keep these forgotten stories alive. On the 8th night, Mardonius made his move. He sent his cavalry in a massive night raid to destroy the Greek supply lines, and more importantly, to destroy the Gargaphia Spring, the main water source for the Greek army. His cavalrymen filled the spring with dirt, stones, and the bodies of dead animals, making the water undrinkable. By morning, 100,000 Greek soldiers were facing a choice: retreat to find water, or die of thirst while staring at the enemy. Pausanias made the call. The Greeks would retreat during the night, falling back to a new position closer to Plataea, where there were multiple water sources and better defensive terrain. It was a reasonable military decision. It was also a disaster in execution. Night retreats are hard. Night retreats with 100,000 men, most of whom aren't professional soldiers, most of whom are scared and tired and thirsty, are nearly impossible. The Greek line fragmented. Units got lost in the dark. The Athenians moved to one position. The other Greek cities moved to another. And the Spartans, the 10,000 professional warriors who were supposed to be the anchor of the entire army, got delayed. One of their commanders, a man named Amampharatus, refused to retreat. He was a Spartan officer, and he considered retreat to be disgraceful. He literally sat on a rock with his unit and refused to move, even when Pausanias was screaming at him to fall back with the rest of the army. The argument went on for hours, precious hours in the darkness, while the rest of the Greek army was scattered across the countryside. By dawn, the Spartans were isolated. 10,000 Spartan hoplites and their Helot support troops were caught in the open, separated from the rest of the Greek army, with no water source and no support. Mardonius saw them, and he attacked. This is where the revenge begins. The Persian cavalry hit first, waves of mounted archers who could shoot from horseback, wheel away, and reload while moving. The Spartans formed their phalanx, shields locked, spears out, and they took it. Arrows bounced off bronze armor, stuck in wooden shields, found gaps, and killed men, but the phalanx held. This wasn't the chaos of Thermopylae, where the pass was narrow and the fighting was close. This was open ground. This was exactly the kind of terrain where cavalry should dominate infantry. The Spartans didn't break, they didn't even bend. Mardonius, watching from his position, made a decision. He ordered his elite infantry forward. The Immortals, the same unit that had fought at Thermopylae, the best the Persian Empire could produce, marched toward the Spartan phalanx. Behind them came thousands more Persian infantry, troops from across the empire, all converging on this one isolated Spartan force. Pausanias didn't order a retreat. He couldn't. There was nowhere to go. The Persians were between the Spartans and the rest of the Greek army. The only way out was through, so he gave the order that every Spartan had been waiting to hear since Thermopylae. Attack. Picture the scene. You're in the Spartan phalanx, 8th row back, maybe 10th. You can't see much except the back of the man in front of you and the forest of spear tips extending over the front ranks. You can hear everything. The screaming, the orders, the rhythmic chant the Spartans used to keep the formation moving. You're pushing with your shield against the man in front of you, and the entire phalanx is moving forward like a single organism, a bronze wall with spear tips. The collision happens at walking speed. The Spartans don't charge, they don't run. They walk into contact because running breaks the formation, and the formation is everything. The front rank spears hit Persian shields, Persian bodies, Persian faces. The sound is indescribable, a mix of wood on bronze, screaming, the crunch of spear points punching through armor and flesh. The Persians had wicker shields, woven reeds covered in leather. They were light, they were maneuverable, and they were completely inadequate against Spartan spears driven by the weight of 8 rows of armored men pushing from behind. The Persian front line shattered, not broke, not retreated, shattered. The immortals, the elite troops, were being killed faster than they could be replaced, but the Persians had numbers. For every man that fell, 2 more stepped up. The Persian infantry fought with courage and discipline. They grabbed Spartan spears and tried to break them. They threw themselves under the phalanx to create gaps. They died by the hundreds, then by the thousands, and they kept coming. This brings us to Mardonius himself. The Persian general, watching his elite troops getting butchered by a force that should have been destroyed hours ago, made a decision that generals throughout history have repeated and regretted. He personally led a cavalry charge into the Spartan flank. Mardonius was riding a white horse. He was surrounded by 1,000 elite Persian cavalry, the best in the world, and he charged directly at the Spartan phalanx while it was engaged with his infantry. It was a brilliant tactical move. Hit an engaged phalanx from the side and it collapses. Every military manual says so. Every battle in history proves it. The Spartans didn't collapse. They curved. The outer ranks of the phalanx bent backward, creating a concave shape that absorbed the cavalry charge like a glove catching a fist. The cavalry couldn't penetrate. The horses wouldn't charge into the spear wall. And while Mardonius was trying to break the Spartan flank, a Spartan hoplite named Leonidas threw a rock. Not a spear, a rock. It hit Mardonius in the head. The Persian general fell from his white horse and died, either from the rock or from the 50 Spartans who immediately swarmed his position and stabbed anything that moved. When Mardonius died, the entire character of the battle changed. The Persian army, which had been fighting with discipline and courage, saw their general's white horse running loose, saw the Spartans holding something high on their spears, and they understood. The elite Persian cavalry guard that had surrounded Mardonius was dead, all of them. 1,000 of the best cavalry in the world gone. The Persian line broke, not slowly, not gradually, instantly. One moment they're fighting, the next they're running. And the Spartans, who had been holding formation for hours, who had been taking casualties and grinding forward one step at a time, were suddenly chasing a broken army. This is where revenge stops being a battle and becomes a slaughter. If you made it this far, you're a true history enthusiast. Please verify your subscription now. It really helps the channel keep these forgotten stories alive. What happens next is why the Greeks remembered Plataea as the day they butchered the Persian army so thoroughly that Xerxes never came back. The Spartans pursued the broken Persian infantry back to their fortified camp. The Persians had built a wooden wall around their camp, a standard defensive measure, and the survivors were streaming inside, trying to find safety behind the walls. The Spartans, who had no siege equipment, who had no experience with wall fighting, hit that wooden wall like a tsunami hitting a fence. They didn't have ladders, they didn't have rams, they had shields, spears, and an anger that had been building for 8 months. They used their shields to bash through sections of the wooden wall. They formed human pyramids to get over the top. They found gates and forced them open through sheer weight of numbers. Inside the Persian camp was everything. Supplies, treasure, slaves, camp followers, wounded soldiers, and thousands of Persian infantry who thought they were safe behind walls. They weren't. The Spartans poured through the breaches and began methodically killing everyone they found. This wasn't battle. This was extermination. The Athenians, who had been separated from the Spartans during the chaotic night retreat, heard the sounds of battle and came running. They arrived to find the Spartans inside the Persian camp, ankle-deep in bodies, still killing. The Athenians joined in. Then the other Greek contingents arrived. What followed was hours of uncontrolled massacre. Ancient sources say the Persian losses at Plataea were catastrophic. Of the 120,000 men Mardonius had brought to battle, only 43,000 made it out of Greece alive. That's not casualties, that's survivors. The rest were dead or captured. The Spartans lost 91 men. 91 out of 10,000. Let that sink in for a moment. The Spartans brought 10,000 men to battle, fought for hours against a numerically superior force, broke the Persian army, pursued them into their camp, and slaughtered them by the thousands, and they lost 91 warriors. One of those 91 was Aristodmus. Remember Aristodmus, the coward of Thermopylae, the man who couldn't die fast enough to erase his shame. He got his wish at Plataea. Ancient sources say he fought like a man possessed. He left the Spartan formation, which was the ultimate violation of Spartan military doctrine, and he threw himself into the Persian lines alone. He killed and killed until the Persians brought him down. The Spartans didn't honor him. They buried him with the other dead. They acknowledged his bravery, but they didn't give him the hero's honors they gave to other fallen warriors. Why? Because he broke formation. Because he fought for personal glory instead of for Sparta. Because even in death, even in suicidal courage, he was thinking about himself and his shame instead of the man standing next to him. That's Sparta. That's the culture that produced the 300. That's the mindset that turned revenge into an industrial process. While the Spartans were butchering Persians at Plataea, something else was happening 150 miles away. On the same day, possibly the same hour, the Greek fleet cornered the Persian navy at Mycale and destroyed it. The Persian invasion was over, not just defeated, dismantled. The Persian army was broken at Plataea. The Persian navy was burning at Mycale. And Xerxes, the god king who had marched into Greece with the largest army the world had ever seen, retreated to Persia and never came back. But here's where the irony gets dark. Here's where the story of revenge becomes a cautionary tale about what happens when warriors raised for nothing, but war suddenly don't have an enemy. Pausanias, the Spartan regent who had led the Greeks to victory at Plataea, became a hero. He was celebrated across Greece. He received honors and gifts from every Greek city, and it destroyed him. Within a few years, he was accused of negotiating with the Persians, of trying to become a tyrant, of betraying everything Sparta stood for. The Spartans trapped him in a temple and bricked up the door, leaving him to starve to death. The man who had avenged the 300 died alone, entombed by his own people, labeled a traitor. The Spartans themselves, within 30 years of Plataea, would be at war with Athens, their allies from the Persian Wars. The Peloponnesian War would kill more Greeks than the Persian invasion ever did. The unity that had held at Thermopylae and Plataea shattered the moment there was no external enemy to focus all that violence upon. This proves one thing that history keeps trying to teach us. Revenge is satisfying, victory is sweet, but warriors who define themselves entirely by their enemies become dangerous when those enemies are gone. The Spartans were the perfect weapon for destroying the Persian invasion. They were methodical, brutal, disciplined, and completely uninterested in anything except war. And when the war ended, they turned all that machinery on their fellow Greeks. The 300 at Thermopylae became immortal because they died. They became perfect, frozen in time at their moment of greatest courage. The 10,000 at Plataea won the revenge campaign, achieved the victory, got the justice they sought, and then had to live with the question, now what? When your entire culture is built around war, what do you do in peace? Shift your perspective for a moment. Look at Plataea not as a glorious victory, but as a warning. The Spartans didn't just defeat the Persians, they annihilated them. 91 casualties versus 77,000 dead. That's not a battle, that's extermination. That's industrial-scale violence executed by men who had been trained from age 7 to do nothing but kill efficiently. And when those men came home, covered in glory and Persian blood, they couldn't turn that off. They couldn't become farmers or merchants or philosophers. They were weapons. And weapons need targets. The Battle of Plataea is remembered as one of the most decisive victories in Western history, and it was. It ended the Persian threat to Greece. It avenged Thermopylae. It proved that Greek hoplites, properly led and properly motivated, were unstoppable. But it also proved something darker, that a society built entirely on military excellence, on shame culture and honor culture, and dying gloriously in battle, cannot survive peace. Before we close, check out this next video on the screen about what happened to Sparta after its victory culture consumed itself from within. The story doesn't end at Plataea. It gets worse, more tragic, and more relevant to understanding how military cultures collapse. The Persian Wars ended with Plataea and Mycale, but the warrior culture that won those wars couldn't stop fighting. The Spartans went home, but they brought the war with them. Within a generation, the sons of the men who fought at Plataea were fighting Athenians instead of Persians. The methods stayed the same, the discipline stayed the same, the brutality stayed the same, only the targets changed. And Aristodemus, the coward who died bravely, the Spartans remembered him but not as a hero, they remembered him as a warning. As proof that individual glory means nothing compared to collective discipline, as evidence that even suicidal bravery doesn't erase shame if it's done for the wrong reasons. His name appears in the histories, his death is recorded, and the historians note that while he fought with incredible courage, the Spartans did not think highly of him because he left the formation. That's what happens when your entire moral framework is built around collective violence. Individual courage becomes suspect, individual glory becomes shameful, and when the wars end, when there's nothing left to conquer, the machine turns inward and starts consuming itself. The Battle of Plataea was fought in August of 479 BC. By 431 BC, the Spartans were besieging Athens. By 404 BC, Sparta was the dominant power in Greece. By 371 BC, Sparta had been destroyed as a military power by Thebes at the Battle of Leuctra. Within 150 years of their greatest victory, the Spartans had gone from unstoppable to irrelevant. They couldn't adapt. They couldn't change. They were perfect weapons in a world that no longer needed them. This is why we study Plataea, not because the Spartans won, not because they got their revenge, but because they show us what happens when a culture optimizes entirely for one thing and then that thing becomes obsolete. The 10,000 Spartans who marched to Plataea were the most effective killing force in the ancient world. They proved it. They annihilated an army that outnumbered them. And then they went home and slowly realized that everything they were good at, everything they had trained for their entire lives, was becoming less and less relevant in a world that was moving toward diplomacy, trade, culture, and philosophy. Athens produced Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Sparta produced warriors. And when the age of warriors ended, Sparta ended with it. Consider hitting that like button if you've made it this far through the story of how 10,000 Spartans brutally avenged the 300, and then discovered that revenge, even when perfectly executed, doesn't fill the void it's meant to fill. Subscribe for more deep dives into the moments where history reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature, war, and the civilizations we build around violence. The Persian army that burned Athens was butchered at Plataea. Mardonius died from a rock to the head. Aristodemus died trying to erase his shame and failed even in death. Pausanias became a hero and then died a traitor. And the Spartans won everything they fought for and lost everything that mattered. Picture this one last time. It's 479 BC, and you're a young Spartan warrior marching home from Plataea. You're covered in Persian blood. Your spear is notched from the fighting. Your shield has arrows stuck in it. You watched your phalanx butcher an army. You saw your commanders kill a Persian general with a rock and then slaughter his bodyguard. You're a hero. Your city is saved. Greece is saved. Western civilization, though nobody's using that term yet, is saved. And you're thinking, now what? What do I do with all this training, all this rage, all this capacity for organized violence now that the enemy is gone? The answer the Spartans found was, find new enemies. And eventually they ran out of those too. That's the final lesson of Plataea. Revenge is easy. Victory is achievable. Living with yourself afterward is the hard part. The 300 died and became legends. The 10,000 won and became a cautionary tale. Choose which story you'd rather be remembered for.